This anterior view of the chest will show you the heart with a nice pericardial sac. But as we remove that pericardial sac and the fat disappears, we finally can visualize the coronary vessels.
First, what you want to do is find the coronaries coming off the ascending aorta. Here in this image, once the fat is removed, you can see the left coronary artery coming off the left side there. So here you see the pulmonic valve just anterior to the aortic. And here you see the anterior interventricular artery. Notice the left coronary immediately splits into two branches as soon as it originates. This anterior interventricular artery is also known as the LAD, or the left anterior descending artery. Here you see the auricle. You've heard me refer to that a couple of times when we talk about the atria. So this is the ear-like projection that comes off the atria. It's a small chamber within the chamber, essentially. And a piece of it's actually been cut off, as you've seen with the green dotted circle there, to reveal the left coronary artery. Now, the other branch that the left coronary splits into when it terminates is the circumflex. And the circumflex is going to wrap around in this atrioventricular sulcus between the left atrium and left ventricle to the posterior aspect of the heart.
Recall we said the pulmonary valve and the associated pulmonary trunk are the most anterior. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way because we know we're going to have to be looking just behind that structure as the vessels come off of the aorta. And you can see them there nicely, but realize it's hidden under the atrial appendage here. So if I remove the atria over to the side, you can really appreciate the atrioventricular sulcus, the groove that structure is going to be traveling in. And so you have to use your reverse dissection to get in through the visceral fat and really pull this atrial appendage up to find the very small left coronary artery. And so it's very short. That's all that we have is a left coronary, because it branches quickly while under the cover of that atrial appendage. You can see both of its branches. Coming out towards me is the anterior interventricular artery, and the anterior interventricular branch is going to be right on top of the septum that divides our two ventricles, that interventricular septum. And so we'll call that the interventricular sulcus. So the anterior interventricular is that branch coming at me. What is the branch here continuing to traveling around? And that is your circumflex coronary artery. Again, you're going to have to really get underneath the appendage to locate that circumflex vessel.
Now here you see the right coronary artery. The right coronary artery comes off the right sinus through the right ostia of the aorta. And it again is under the auricle of the right atria. So you're going to have to again dissect out the right coronary artery to locate it in the same AV sulcus. Let's look closer at that right coronary now that the right auricle has been retracted here. You see that there is a small branch that comes immediately off of it as soon as it arises from the aorta here. That's our right atrial branch. It's going to ascend up and eventually send a branch off that gets the SA node, the pacemaker of the heart. Now, if you follow the right coronary all the way around to the right aspect there along its margin, you see where it gives off a marginal branch. And then it continues posterior all the way to the crux of the heart, or the cross of the heart, where the AV sulcus and the IV sulcus meet here. And that's where a nodal branch goes in for the AV nodal branch. So the AV node is the gatekeeper, while the SA node is the pacemaker. Before the right coronary terminates by giving off the AV nodal branch, you'll see a branch dive down the posterior aspect, the posterior interventricular artery. So this is a typical example in a right dominant heart. Make sure you understand that if that artery arises from the left coronary instead, this heart then becomes a left dominant heart.
Moving the right atrial appendage to find the coronary coming off the ascending aorta just behind the pulmonary trunk in that atrioventricular sulcus. You have a marginal branch here coming off the side on the right. And if you look closely, you actually have a marginal on the left. And so on each right and left margin, we have marginal branches. On the left, that's going to come off the circumflex. On the right coronary itself. If you follow the right coronary around under the cover again of the atria, you see that in this situation we have a right dominant heart because the posterior interventricular artery here traveling in the interventricular sulcus is from the right coronary. And so we're looking at the diaphragmatic surface.
So let's look at the left coronary artery a little closer as well. You can see it behind the pulmonary trunk as it comes off the left side of the ascending aorta. And notice again, they're retracting that left auricle so that you can find the left coronary splitting into the anterior interventricular artery, or the LAD, and you see branches here coming off that anterior interventricular. You'll have 3 of those usually. Those are called diagonal branches. Now, as it gives off these diagonal branches, it's traveling in the anterior interventricular sulcus. Notice it goes all the way down to the apex of the heart and even wraps around to the posterior aspect. This is unique. Most of the vessels do not reach around to the opposite side of the heart. Here you see the circumflex, and then the circumflex gives off a marginal branch. You'll remember that the right coronary also gave off a marginal branches, and they're right there at the right and left borders of the heart. So this image is to talk about how our conduction system and our septum get supplied from these interventricular vessels we've been talking about. First, let's identify those vessels. So here you see the anterior interventricular coming off the left coronary and it wrapping around the apex of the heart. Now look and make sure you see the right coronary. Here, follow it around posteriorly and find the posterior interventricular artery. Now track that posterior interventricular artery down to where it anastomoses with the anterior interventricular artery in the posterior interventricular sulcus, right there where that arrow is. So if there's an obstruction in one of these vessels, the other one can help compensate. This is collateral flow. So if you look here, you see that anastomosis on the posterior aspect. You can see the heart's been flipped around. And so when you look on the image to the right of this, you see the orange and yellow cross section of the heart. Notice anterior is at the top of the screen and the diaphragmatic surface is at the bottom of the screen. The orange is representing the left coronary, the red, the right coronary. It's obvious the left coronary gets a lot of the heart, even though this is a right dominant heart. The anterior and posterior interventriculars are getting all of our septum. And our septum is where the major part of our conduction system is located. This anterior interventricular vessel, you can see in orange, gets 2/3 of the septum, and therefore the majority of the conduction system. You'll see the posterior only gets 1/3 of the septum. It's a much smaller vessel.
Some other important arteries that you might see are some smaller branches. So the first branch off of this right coronary is actually here, a right atrial branch. And this right atrial branch gives off a small branch called the SA nodal. That's going to be the blood supply to the pacemaker of the heart, the SA node. And the AV node is located more in the area here where all the chambers come together. And so right here in the crux of the heart, or the cross, that was where we find that node. And so usually what happens is that right coronary sends a small branch in at the crux of the heart there and gets the AV node. And so when I remove the atria, you can actually see this. You see the small SA nodal coming off that right atrial to go to the SA node. And then here you see the crux of the heart sending a branch in there from the right coronary to get that AV nodal down by the cusp here.
Here you see the cardiac veins. Let's start by talking about the coronary sinus, because this is the main tributary where all of the veins we're going to talk about are draining to. You may recall when we talked about the right atrium's internal features, we talked about the opening of the coronary sinus. This is that coronary sinus. And so all the blood that's vascularizing the heart from those coronary arteries is going to come back to the right atrium through this system.
The coronary sinus, you can see the ostia as it drains into the left atrium. You'll be able to identify that. This coronary sinus is going to receive all of the veins. And the first one and most obvious is seen here. The posterior interventricular artery travels with this vein. So this is your middle cardiac vein. The middle cardiac vein is on the diaphragmatic surface here, going directly into that coronary sinus. On each side, you have marginal veins or small cardiac veins. You can see the left marginal here, and then you can see the right marginal on this side as well. The main vein that you're going to be able to identify, other than the coronary sinus, is our great cardiac vein that's on the anterior surface and even travels around the side here. You can see how large the great cardiac vein is, and that it actually kind of really merges directly into that coronary sinus we talked about. Traveling just over this right coronary, you have small veins, the anterior cardiac veins, that are moving blood back into this atria. You may see those.
So this conduction system we've been hitting towards has a few pieces you also need to be aware of. The pacemaker that's already been talked about, the SA node, is located, as we saw in the heart lecture, where the crista terminalis terminates at the SVC, right near the superior aspect of the atrium. You can see that illustrated in image A here, and how it's propagating that signal out through the atria, and then it will eventually land on the AV node. That AV node can be found in the intraatrial septum, right by the septal cusp, in the area of the fossa ovalis. You'll notice that a single branch leaves that AV node. That's the bundle of His. Once the bundle of His reaches the interventricular septum, it then branches into the right and left bundle branches. Each of those bundle branches will then carry the fibers to the respective ventricles. From there, we have Purkinje fibers that will spread out through the ventricles. Now, we need to lie the vasculature on top of this so you can understand how ischemia can lead to conduction issues. So here in this image, you see that. Here you see that anterior interventricular artery, the LAD, with its diagonal branches and its septal branches. And you can appreciate that it gets the majority of the bundle branch, the Purkinje fibers for the left ventricle, and even some of the bundle of His. Now, if you follow the posterior interventricular, you see that it gets the AV node, a little bit of the left bundle branch, and then really that's it. It's the right coronary that truly gets the Purkinje fibers from the right bundle branch, along with some of that anterior interventricular artery, because of the small posterior location of that posterior interventricular. So our left bundle branch is anterior interventricular, and our right bundle branch is a little bit of the anterior interventricular, but really some of those marginal. Now here's the SA node, and you'll recall that we said the right atrial branch gets the SA node, and that's the first branch off the right coronary artery as soon as it arises from the aorta.
You can also see the AV node and note that this is a right dominant heart.
The cardiac plexus can be seen in this posterior thoracic wall image. And it's found at the base of the heart. Remember, the base of the heart is going to butt up to the carina here, right against the esophagus. So this is going to contain autonomic fibers that travel to the heart, as well as visceral afferent fibers carrying that sensory information centrally. It's going to have a similar arrangement to the pulmonary plexus, actually. So this insane diagram can help you outline some of that. Find your red fibers first. So the solid red fibers are representing the preganglionic fibers that start in the IML of the spinal cord with their preganglionic cell bodies, then move out to the spinal nerve, eventually to the spinal ganglion of the sympathetic chain there. It will synapse and have a postganglionic cell body in the sympathetic chain, and then the line becomes dotted because that's a postganglionic sympathetic fiber, and that's the fiber that's going to travel down and enter the plexus. Now, find the blue fibers. you'll see that they're solid much longer. They come down from the brainstem and travel through cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve. They go all the way to the end organ, to the heart, and then synapse. So you find the postganglionic cell body in the heart wall with a very short postganglionic fiber for these parasympathetics. Then if you look at each of them, you see that they have a fiber accompanying them. For the red fibers, you see green. And so that's the afferents for the visceral sensation flowing in the opposite direction, all the way through the same path to the upper thoracic spinal cord segments for the heart here. So the sympathetic and the visceral afferents carrying pain are all going to be together in those top 5 or so thoracic spinal segments. Traveling with the fibers for the vagus nerve, you'll see black fibers. These are carrying reflexive information back up to the brainstem. Information about heart rate, blood pressure, things of that sort, versus pain and irritation that traveled with the fibers in the sympathetics. And so this is important because it helps you understand referred pain. When we get a heart attack, you often hear jaw pain, shoulder pain, chest pain, even abdominal pain. But why? Well, now that you know the sympathetics and the visceral afferent pain fibers are traveling back to those upper thoracic levels, think back to where your upper thoracic dermatomes are. They're represented by the areas that you'll see in this diagram. So those fibers all go back discretely to a specific segment of the spinal cord. And those are the same places our sensory fibers from our body wall are going. So the T2 fiber that's innervating the sympathetics for the heart also has fibers traveling back with it that receive pain information when the heart, for instance, is ischemic. And it goes back to that same T2 level. Well, your sensory fibers for the area on your chest that's innervated by T2's ventral and dorsal rami is also going to be in that same spinal segment. The information goes up to your brain sorts it, and it makes more sense to have body wall pain than visceral pain. So that's a higher order thought processing. And so it tells your body, I'm having this weird random pain in my shoulder, even though it's really heart pain that you're experiencing.
Through reviewing the coronary vasculature, both the arteries and the veins, you hopefully understand better how the heart receives its blood supply. Then reviewing the conduction system, we are now able to put those together and realize when certain arteries are compromised, different pieces of that system can be compromised. We also reviewed the autonomics and the afferent system within the cardiac plexus and looked at how referred pain is generated.